Thank you
Welcome
for that.
to the 2026 Green Party Annual National Meeting. My name is Craig Cayetano. I'm one of your steering committee co-chairs. I'm from the great state of New Jersey, the Garden State. I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker today, Cam Gordon. Cam is born and raised in Minneapolis. That worked real quick with this. Cam earned a BS in education with corporate graduate studies in early childhood education. Cam's professional experience includes owning and operating a child care program and children's music company, associate editor of Public School Montessorian, and author of A Guide to Montessori Education. He served as co-founder of the Minnesota Green Party. I'll allow that. Board chair, Steward Neighborhood, and board member of Common Cause Minnesota, Fair Vote Minnesota, and the Minneapolis Center for Neighborhoods. Cam was elected member to the council for 4 terms. So let's give a loud snap and welcome our keynote speaker, Cam Gordon, to the mic.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. You're good? He's good.
All right, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for that great introduction. Good. All right, I'll move up a little closer then. I have to say that the Green Party of Minnesota and the Green Party nationally has given me so much that it's a real delight and a thrill for me to have this opportunity to maybe give back just a little. I am just an ordinary person. I'm just a guy. You heard that bio. Yeah, I served on some stuff. I had some jobs and all of those things. But I got elected to office. And everybody who's elected to office is a person. It's a regular, ordinary person. We have this tendency to think something amazing happens, and we have this way of doing that to people when they're elected. But just remember, if I could get elected to office, so could you. And what I'm hoping to do in the next 45 minutes or so is get you to think more about possibilities of getting elected to office or possibilities of finding people you know who could and getting elected at the local level. Because at the local level, I believe you can make an incredible difference. And it's also one of the best opportunities for us to build this party is to get people elected at the local level. I'm coming here. All right, now my slides aren't advancing. So that's unfortunate. The arrows didn't work, but I found another way. Yeah. I'm coming to you from Minneapolis, Minnesota. You've probably heard of that. It's been in the news a lot. Minneapolis is a pretty big city, about 400,000 people. There's a lot going on there. It's been in the news a lot these days. And I guess I have a couple questions for you before we really get started. I'm curious, are there any other people out there who are current or former elected officials, elected at some level of government? Raise your hands. Well, I see about 3, 4, okay, 5 people. Great. Are there anybody who you guys could raise your hands again for this too, who may not be in office, but you've run for office before? All right, so there's a lot of people who've run for office. Fantastic way to go. And are there anybody out there who's like been involved in a PTA or a neighborhood group or some kind of board and got elected to be on that board and serve on it? All right, that's more people. Maybe all of you then have already dabbled in this in a little bit, and I think that that's significant. Now, I got involved in the Green Party of Minnesota in 1994 when it was starting. I will confess, I had gone to meetings from what we called there the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. I had tried to help candidates. I tried to make a difference. This was kind of late in my life. I was in my 40s and I thought I'm going to get more involved now. I kind of came of age in the 60s and I was protesting and I was out there and I wanted to make a big difference. And then I had other life events that happened, but I got a little bit more involved in politics. And when the Greens came along, it was like I had found my home. Those 4 pillars, those 10 values, they resonated with me. That's exactly what I wanted to see, was a party that actually had some principles that they were going to follow through on. So I got very excited about it. And the Greens have been growing in Minnesota and in Minneapolis. We've had our ups and downs and we've had a pretty big dip, but we're now resurging. And I think we're coming back. And I just want to take a moment to highlight our endorsed candidates that we have. I think some of them are in the room. I think many of them are. Steve. and Seth isn't here and Jane isn't here, but Senabu is here. And I don't have pictures of Rachel, but Rachel is here. No, there they are. Stand up, the three of them. Look at them. Winkle. And Bruce has also been elected. And you'll notice that some of those are for statewide office, but Rachel and Bruce are running for some pretty, maybe more obscure kind of boards. Three Rivers Park Commissioner and Soil and Water Conservation District. So there's other things besides city council that you could run for. I do want to take a moment to look back a little bit at the city. It was the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So people were talking a lot about history. And I just wanted to be clear that I'll rave about Minnesota and Minneapolis and how great we are and how good we are, but we have a shameful, horrible history. We have a history of genocide. We have a history with concentration camps. We have a history where we did ethnic cleansing. The Dakota people were forced out. It was illegal to live in the state of Minnesota for a long time. There was a bounty if you brought in the scalp of somebody who was Dakota, you would get money from the state government. Yeah. And it probably happened a lot of other places. There's a little map up there, which is about what was going on in Minnesota, according to maybe the European folks, and it's divided on the Mississippi. We had Spain and France and Britain were fighting over who would actually get control of it at the time. There was some fur trading going on and there were other things happening, but it was not even in existence. And the other picture there shows what some of the other images might have been and the people that might have been living around the Twin Cities and the Minneapolis area. I live right now very close to the Mississippi River, which goes right through the city. So we knew ethnic cleansing is part of our history, but we had something a little more recent that reminded us all of that. And I just want to talk a little bit about the Metro surge. You probably saw Minneapolis in the news during this time. We had 2 of our residents who were killed, Alex Preddy and Renee Good. And it was a horrible time. In so many ways, it actually felt like all branches of government had failed us completely, and all levels of government had failed us completely. The legislative, the judicial, the executive branches at the federal level, the state level, the city level, the county level, they weren't doing anything to deal with the horrors that were going on. But we had a grassroots uprising of people that seemed to get it, and they weren't being controlled by any level of government. They're being controlled by each other. We had what I was considering a surge of love that came forward from the residents of our city. You can see how many people turned out in the middle of winter to protest, but we had renegade bandits of mutual aid going on all over the place. We had an Ashley Fairbanks who created some kind of software so somebody could say, I need rent money, and people could go online and get the rent money directly deposited to the right person. Thousands and hundreds of thousands, probably millions of dollars were raised to support folks. Our public schools turned into community centers. The public school teachers were helping coordinate rides to and from school. Food was being brought in, clothing was being brought in, so that they were becoming this reservoir and support people. There were people who were afraid to go to work, afraid to go to the doctor's office, afraid to leave their houses. And it was obvious and it was dramatic and it was significant. We had other people who weren't afraid. So I might not look like it. You might not look like the stereotypical, but I'm one of those anchor babies. My parents came from Canada. So I'm first generation Minnesotan. I didn't have a worry in the world. My kids didn't have a worry in the world walking around, going to the doctors, going to work because of the way we looked. This wasn't just about immigration that was going on. This was a reliving of ethnic cleansing. And I don't really want to, I sort of want to go further into that. But the one point I want to make is what happened there with the mutual aid was a very green thing. It was grassroots democracy. It was organized groups and individuals with Green Party participation who came together and figured out how to do something on their own. It was decentralized. It was a neighborhood level. It was people were blowing whistles on the corners at even smaller than neighborhood levels. But there were signal groups that were divided all up, and it was working without government. I don't know if it could be sustained or could have been sustained. One of the good things about it is it got some people more excited about getting involved in government. Steve Young, our candidate running for governor, he really was activated in the Metro Surge and very involved and was out there probably every day, right, Steve? And so now we're building on that. But it just makes me think this could be some avenue of how we could do more. And I'm going to try to leave that piece now. And I'm impressed that not too many of us started crying, including me. But it's an emotional story, and it's still going on, and we're still working on figuring out what to do about this ethnic cleansing that's going on in our country. I want to switch gears now and just talk a little bit about me. I'm no big expert. I don't have any PhD. I didn't take political science or anything. I'm not a lawyer. But I had some experience in government because I decided to run for office. And I want to talk about the campaign, and I also want to talk about being in office. And I'm not sure which I should talk about more, like how to get there or what to do once when you get there. So raise your hand if you think I should talk more about how to get there. How did I win? Okay, nice. Raise your hand if I should talk more about what I did once I got there. Pretty good balance. All right, I'll try to keep it up. I'm not the timekeeper right now, but I'll try to stay on time. Somebody warned me when we're getting too late because I'd love to have time for questions. So I don't have a whole lot of slides on this, but it was actually quite a long journey for me to get to City Hall. Maybe like some of you, I spent a long time outside City Hall yelling at my government, saying, you should do that, you should do that, we need that, what are you doing, we want this. I did a lot of that. I would show up. Rarely was I inside the building, and certainly not on the third floor. When the Greens started, I decided I'd join the candidate recruitment committee. So I tried to recruit candidates. I went to people who had names and had some history and were involved in things and see if they would run, and if they would run. And it got to the point where I told myself, if we aren't running candidates by 1998, I'm done with this. And then I got to the point where I said, we really need to run people out of our little core group. Recruiting these outside people with name recognition isn't working. And then finally I got to the point where I said, well, I'm just going to run. So in 1996, I ran for state legislature. Had no idea what I was really doing. I knew you're supposed to door knock. And lo and behold, I was taught never go over to anybody's house unless you're invited when I was a kid. So that was really hard. I didn't really have a campaign manager. Some people really rallied around me because I was for single payer universal health care. That was a really big thing in 96. And the opponent or the incumbent, Lee Greenfield, he had crafted this health management organization legislation that would make sure that we had these nonprofit health organizations who are managing it all. And that was passing, and people were really upset. So I got some support. I got 23% of the vote, which was pretty significant. A lot of people thought, way to go. I also got kind of the I don't know what it was, like the urge, or the running isn't so bad. I think I could maybe do that again, or at least I should get involved in my neighborhood. So that's when I joined my neighborhood group board, some other things. I already had a kid in the park teams, and I was a coach, and I was on an advisory committee for the park board program. So I ran for neighborhood group board to see, well, maybe I could like this. And that's when I realized that city government has a lot more to do with people's lives than any other level of government. As a neighborhood group board, and you hear complaints and concerns, and you're trying to solve problems in your neighborhood, it's the city that you go to. So I decided I would run for city council, and I actually told my partner at the time, I said, and she's still my partner. um, yeah, I told her that I think I'm going to run for city council, and I think it might actually take 2 tries because there's an incumbent there, and I'll run once so that I'll get known better and loosen up the incumbent. And so I decided to run for city council, and I ran the first time, and it wasn't successful, but we really got very, very close. And one of the things that was critical for me at that time was to find somebody who would be there with me, who cared almost as much as me about doing it, to work and volunteer for me. I had a Robin Garwood, and he was a young kid, just out of college, just graduated, wanted to make a difference. I knew his father. His father had been active in the Green Party as well, Seth. And Robin got very involved and volunteered and door knocked. And in fact, you can't possibly do this without somebody else or a group of people with you who care about it as much and are willing to put themselves out just as much as you are, so you can get elected. And he came there and he did that, and he helped us. He didn't really know what he was doing very much either this first time, but we knew more. We worked really hard. And surprise, surprise, there was a primary back then in Minneapolis. I got through the primary, and the incumbent got bumped out. It was kind of a two sides of the river thing, where I was in Seward and Paul Zerby was in Prospect Park, and he took Prospect Park's part of the ward, and I took Seward. And so then we ran against each other. We ran hard. It was looking good. We felt positive about it. Election results came in, and I lost by 70 votes. It was kind of crushing and kind of heartbreaking. But remember what I told myself earlier, it might take 2 tries. I thought it wasn't going to take, because we bumped out the incumbent. But 4 years later, I was back and ready to try again, and I had more experience then too. And one of the keys that I learned is the values of the Green Party and the principles work. So when I ran on every piece of literature, sometimes I brought them down to one word. Sometimes I just said justice, peace, ecology, democracy. But I promoted those with the people in the ward. Every time I went out, every piece of literature, I told them, those are the principles I'll govern on. They resonated. People liked it. They got it. I also heard a lot of people who said, how are you ever going to possibly govern? You're a green. You're not one of them. And I would tell them, I'm running to represent you, and I'm going to be able to work with anybody to get things done in City Hall. I wouldn't have gotten that close, and I wouldn't have won the next time if I didn't get thousands of people who identified as Democrats and DFL, and I got a chunk of Republicans, but Minneapolis is really a one-party town. That's not a duopoly in Minneapolis. In Minneapolis, it's a monopoly. So I was trying to break the monopoly, and people were used to voting Democrat all the time. That's what they did. They didn't think much. And I said, think of me. Look at what I represent. Isn't that what you represent? Aren't these your values? Yeah, they're my values. Those are good things. All right, give me a chance, and I can prove to you that I can represent you on there. And the second time that I ran, it worked. And it actually worked a little bit because my opponent was running against some of the values. It was one of the strangest things that happened, but really happened in my favor. I was talking about peace and nonviolence, and then she came back and said, but you don't handle international policy. You're not having to do with war. And I had to tell her and others, I said, domestic violence is running rampant in our city. We have property assaults and property damage that are going on. Violence. We need nonviolence and peace in everybody's home and everybody's street. So that resonated. She also, I ran on. I want to fight against racial profiling and racism in our city. And she was one of those at the time and said, well, haven't we almost solved all the racism and the racial problems at the time? And so I think that probably helped me. But she had to try to distinguish herself, and I think she did so in a bad way. So when the results came in that day, I won by 108 votes. So it is very, very narrow and very close. And one thing I learned that I want to share with you, especially when you're running local, I think, but maybe anywhere, it's not always, and it's not even mostly the issues that you're pushing for. I'm sure I had issues on my campaign literature that people didn't really like and worried them a little bit, like public ownership of the electric company or something like that, or immigrant voting rights, which I had on all my literature. But what people are really looking for and is somebody who will be thoughtful, who they think will work hard, and who cares about them. They want to vote for somebody they think will actually care about them when they're elected and will be able to help them out. And that's a big thing to keep in mind. I certainly changed myself a little when I was running. Before I ran, I had long hair and a ponytail. I wore junky clothes. So I also had to get through what I call the 30-second window. When you knock on the door and you talk to people, you've got about 30 seconds, and in their heads, they're going, what can I come up with so that I don't ever have to think about this person anymore? So mouthwash, that's a good thing to remember, because if you fail the breath test in the 30 seconds, they'll get rid of you. So how do you look normal enough or clean enough, or how do you have that presentation enough so they'll at least give you 30 seconds at their door and then get some more? And the door knocking is really, really, really important. And I learned between my two campaigns a lot about how you can actually pay attention to where the voters are. We wanted to turn out new voters. That's a big thing you got to do. You got to try to do that. So I made a rule that I'm not skipping any doors, because the door knockers will tell you should skip those doors. They don't vote there. But I also made a concession that I said, but I'll go to the precincts where the highest voter turnout is more times than the other precincts, because you need to go after what one of my guys called the golden oldies. So if you're running locally, you look at who votes in the municipal elections, and if they voted in the last 3, they're going to vote in this one. So talk to them, get to them, so you get their vote. You've actually taken one away from the others. So that's another strategy that I think helps a lot. And those are some of my thoughts on all of that. But then I learned some different lessons once I got in there. So I won, and it was fantastic. It was amazing. It was delightful. And it was kind of shocking. But I ran and I won to prove how we could make those 4 principles our decision-making thing. And actually, I used all 10 of them often. But it was kind of hard at first. So finding my way in City Hall, and there's a couple of pictures. There's me, all big and important, sitting up at the dais, they called it. And that's the big picture of the dais where we all sat, and people looked up at you as you're sitting in this desk with these, security guards around in this very fancy, fancy room. That was pretty bizarre. There were 2 things that kind of happened early on. One thing is I had such high hopes, and it seemed like it was this chance of a lifetime. I actually was very prolific in my campaign literature, and I wanted to put platforms on every issue. So I was very public about what I was going to do. And when I was running, I was probably acting like, and I'm going to get all that done right off the bat. You better believe it. We're going to change everything. I didn't even really know about all the obstacles that were in the way, like immigrant voting rights in Minnesota. That's in the Constitution. And I wasn't quite sure about that. So even in local elections, we'd have to change our Constitution. Not to pick on Minnesota too much, but guess who voted to make it a state in the first place? They weren't the people who were residents living there. They were immigrants. But then later, when they were worried about too many Germans, I guess, moving into the state, they said, we're going to pass a law that says you can't vote until you're a citizen. And they did it in the Constitution. So that was one of those things that I never accomplished. In fact, there's lots of failures in my 16 years that I didn't get to and couldn't get to. But boy, did I have hopes when I came in. Now, finally, I'm going to be able to deliver my agenda. Now I'm inside City Hall. Isn't that fantastic? But there were also some rude, harsh awakenings, I guess I call it here. That's a picture of a vacant building back in the day. It's a grain elevator. I was in office about 23 days. And an urban explorer, young college student urban explorer, was in that, fell and died. So, and we had laws about protecting your vacant buildings so people can't get in, right? That was a city government matter. We were trying to prevent it. I failed. We failed. I had to talk to the dad. I had to have community meetings. Being in local government is bigger than the dreaming issues and all the platform planks. All of a sudden, you're worried about clean water for the whole city, street lighting, traffic accidents, all of these things that came up. And then I think about 6 months into my time in office, this happened. You might have heard about the 35W bridge collapse. Now, half of that bridge was in Ward 2, my ward. That bridge that's next to it was in my ward. That's the day I suddenly realized I have 8 bridges that cross the Mississippi River. 13 people died in that one. That was another government failure. This was an opportunity, though, that also showed me that who's in there can make a difference. This bridge collapsed right before the Republican National Convention was coming to the Twin Cities. The state and federal government were in a big hurry to fix it as soon as possible. I don't want to not linger on the tragedy and all the deaths there, but picking up the pieces afterwards then became part of my role. That 10th Avenue Bridge, living under that 10th Avenue Bridge, squatters were there. Chester and Marcia had lived there for a really long time. When they came in to put in the new bridge, they came in and told me, we can't have these people illegally living on railroad land under this bridge. We're going to need it as a staging area. And so I thought, oh man, we're going to lose this one. Chester and Marcia are going to have to leave. Well, Chester and Marcia were loved in the neighborhood. Now, they've been living on vacant railroad land for a long time, and it was lucky it was railroad land because the city and the state couldn't really have a lot of leverage, and the railroad could care less about their land. They're a big national organization. So we were actually able to convince all the powers that be we'll move Chester and Marcia to an apartment while you're doing your construction, but you won't touch their property or their land. They had 2 vehicles on there, gardens, everything. It was a full-blown, yeah. And they were dear, sweet people. Marcia would go play violin by the Guthrie Theater and raise money. Chester, he was an alcoholic, but he did cartoons, and people loved him in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood. If you know Cedar Riverside, it's quite an eccentric mix of stuff. But anyway, because I was there, I was able to advocate to them and basically tell the federal government up the chain of command that you better not mess with this, or we're going to mess with you getting your bridge done before the convention comes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they just were willing to go along with it. So it does make a difference who's there. But the other part of that story is when you're a city council member and in local office, you can really make an impact on individual lives and help them out. Now, these are some of the things that happened when I took office that were, well, this is sort of some of the metaphors, but first, they have you lose your identity, kind of. So you get elected, you go to City Hall, everybody starts calling you council member. Sometimes they'll stick a Gordon at the end, but you can just know that all the city staff and everybody, they'll just call you council member. You're a title, you're that thing over there. And oh, by the way, you don't want to talk to a council member about this. There's all this management levels in city government too. And people at some level you can tell are told, don't bring this up to a council member, but this and this and this and this and this and this and this. And that just seems bizarre. In fact, I was struck by how I thought I'd gone back to monarch England when I got in there. It just felt like this is just a massive bureaucracy. There's all these different levels and structures. How can this possibly function? Also, when I had my great ideas like immigrant voting rights, it suddenly felt like this is pushing a boulder up a hill. This is impossible, insurmountable. All these things seemed like problems. Also, we had a legislative cycle that was 2 weeks long. All our committees met, all the legislation came forward and was ready in every 2 weeks, and then it would repeat itself. So the bureaucracy and the whole government felt like it was just a speeding train that was going on. How would I ever get a hold of it? Or else I'm paddling and getting nowhere, trying to up against the current. You know, I want clean energy. We had this idea back then. Remember, peak oil was a thing before they got all this fracking and stuff. I couldn't even get the council to want to start a peak oil work group to look at the problem because that's a federal issue. We're not worried about climate and energy now. And that wasn't that long ago. And I don't have any idea how far behind time I am, but I started thinking about how being future focused means a lot of things. Do I have 5 minutes for questions as well? All right. I started to think about there's actually ways we can line things up or we can get things done in the future if we start now. So I started thinking more about planting seeds, just saying the right word at the right meeting, just have a staff direction to research that, have a study session on this, on that, what we can do. We also pass resolutions sometimes, feel-good resolutions or whatever, which didn't mean you're actually changing policy, but you're supporting an idea and a concept. So we'd set goals. So and laying the track. So thinking about where we want to be way out there, because I realized the reason I can't control this locomotive is because I didn't lay the track and it's heading in that direction. If we want to change that, we better start putting in some stuff now. So we did a lot of that with plans and other things. Also, I got bogged down stopping bad stuff at the beginning, which is something that you can actually do, is call it out. When somebody came in and said, let's make it illegal to put a living room couch on your front porch, I said, that's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, you can imagine maybe it gets rodents or bugs or something like that, but I have a lot of students who live in Ward 2 and a lot of other people, and they have couches and they're going to reuse them on their porch. No big deal. Why are we making a stink about it? One council member wanted to make it illegal to go down the alley that you didn't live on, or you weren't doing some kind of work for a home of somebody who lives on that alley. This was a public safety kind of idea. Then we had these anti-panhandling ordinance that were out there. So there was lots of things that we could do. One thing I really want to highlight, though, is me being there actually gave people access that they never had, because I could let them in, invite them into the process. That table right there has the police chief on it, and it has a bunch of people who wanted to do protesting for foreclosures that were coming up at that time during the foreclosure crisis, and somebody from the mayor's office. I got them in there to talk.
We have a short amount of time until we have to jump to next, but there is a question in the chat. Are there differences between running local campaigns today versus how it was in the 90s?
And don't forget, I ran one in the 90s, and all the rest of them were after the 90s. So, and there are certainly differences. When I first, even 2001, Facebook wasn't even much of a thing. So social media is different. All that stuff's a little bit different. I think people don't think campaign literature matters anymore. I actually think it can make a big difference if you have it in paper writing and you leave it at the door and it's your position statements. I actually think that face-to-face door knocking is way more important than social media. I think you get bogged down making your videos on Facebook and it never gets to the golden oldies who are going to show up and vote. And also they want a real relationship with a real person to be their representative. Somebody they know actually knows them and ask them a question about something. When you're door knocking, save a question in your first 2 minutes or whatever, so that you can hear from them too. So I'd say yes, a lot has changed, but I think some of the tried and true we should stick with. I just want to do a couple of big things, and I know, and maybe we can see if there are questions. But let me just I wanted to talk about how important it is to use the Green Party principles, not just for what policies we develop, for how we actually develop them. I harped a little bit on that future focus thing, but I think these other ones are important too. Especially, I think respect for diversity is important. One of the ways I was able to get reelected is I did make concessions and compromises, and I made concessions and compromises with and among the people I represented. Um, I had a bizarre, I'll give you one little example, and maybe I was more willing to do that than others, but I also got reelected consistently and didn't even have opponents for 3 of those races. I thought it was a bad idea. We had in our zoning code that it was only family members can live in certain housing except it's a family or one non-relative. That was discriminating against people who weren't families. Now they carved out something for domestic partners if they registered. I fought and fought to get that stripped away. Lots of resistance from a lot of the homeowners in the university areas that were worried about it, and landlords run away. So I created something called intentional communities and said, just have them register as an intentional community, give one contact person for city, rental licensing to deal with. That passed. And then 2 years later, we stripped any family requirements completely out of the code, but we had to take some steps. And I'll just kind of show you this picture, laying that new track, and you can maybe read those 2 vision statements of the city, one from 2009 and one from 2019. They changed dramatically, and we were able to, there was actually a big shift and a big change in the council in that time. Before we developed this comprehensive plan, there were a lot of progressives, and that's what kind of we call them over there, who came on board. And I think partly they did it because they were saying, look, these green ideas are kind of popular. Voters like it. Look, this lefty dude who cares about the climate got elected. Maybe I'll run again. I hit a bit of a roadblock, though, because they thought they had to run with the one party. So we ended up having that inside change that one party thing, and they weren't running as Greens. And that maybe could just tell us we need to build the infrastructure so candidates feel like they get stuff from the Greens too, not just the endorsement, but a database or all these other things. And yeah. Now, are there a couple of questions? I know we're. Yeah, we
Could you repeat the question?
one of the questions. Yeah. He wants to know, what did you do with defund the police? Yeah. So we sort of lost the biggest battle on that with the charter amendment. I have to tell you, I ran on police brutality and racial profiling and accountability. I thought it was going to be an easier fix. That would have been a better example maybe than immigrant voting rights. But we came in and we thought we even rewrote the Civilian Review Authority at first. But the way it was structured, and it took a while to get this from the city attorney, our charter says the mayor has full total control of the police department. So I said, we need to fix that charter. I had a couple attempts on my own to try to fix the charter. And then there was a big opening with the murder of George Floyd. There was a big awakening in the city, and it looked like this was going to be possible. And there was even a charter amendment that got written. But we had a major backlash. In fact, following the murder of George Floyd and all the civil violence that occurred, several of those more progressive council members I talked about lost their election, including me. And part of that was because people were reacting out of fear. And there's lots of white voters in the city of Minneapolis. In fact, you can really see where they vote. And the city of Minneapolis also has a history of segregation and racial covenants there. So I probably could have talked about that more as one of our problems. But there was kind of this surge of people who hadn't voted much who voted, and they actually voted against a charter amendment. I thought we had language that could have been more acceptable. I actually thought saying defund the police was going to cost us more. We actually, when we passed a resolution, we called it dismantling the Minneapolis Police Department, which is what we wanted to do. Even before George Floyd was killed, we had started developing alternatives. We had our behavioral crisis response That's a previous council. When I was on the council, we created that because we were already trying to take work away from the police department. That the police department, and I think the whole concept of police, there's some reasons why we probably need licensed law enforcement people to do certain things in our society because we don't want vigilantes, okay? But we could probably get everybody else to do everything else, including patrol. Patrol is not something you necessarily even need police for. So it's a big conversation. We lost it. The mayor right now there is just thinks all we need is more police. That's the solution for everything. I heard that when I got elected. I mean, we have the whole country. We need to rethink this problem. That was a long answer, though.
Questions, and then we're gonna.
All right, I'm going to make a last pitch.
All right. So I'm Cassidy Moriarty. I am part of the Young Eco Socialist Caucus, and I have a very kind of straightforward question. I know I've asked about actions to other people, but this was more so how we can support a state like Minnesota. I came into the Green Party post 2020 after the George Floyd protests, but I live in Indiana, so I'm close enough to where when the ICE protests started that I wanted to support, but I didn't know how to get involved or if I would be hurting more than helping if I was to do that. So how would you suggest going forward, knowing that Minnesota has been I'm going to call it a battleground state, time and time again, chosen by the federal government to be, I'm going to call it their test run area. How can we support our nearby Greens to support you guys going forward?
Wow, there's probably a whole bunch of ways that you could support us going forward. I think you could support the candidates we have running there. Something you could donate to their campaigns. That's a possible way you could do it. I know even during the Metro Surge, you could have donated funding through that website too to give support to help people. Now we're not collecting so much, and they don't need that kind of as much financial support as before. That's probably a way to do it. Reach out to the local Greens. I don't really have a great way to get plugged in immediately, but I mean by local Greens, I mean Minnesota Green Party, and maybe there's other ideas. So let me think about it and see what I come up with.
Okay. Hi, M from Green Party of New Mexico. A couple of clarifications, please. When you first ran and won, did you run DFL or did you run as a Green? And is there, I think Minneapolis is kind of unique. Perhaps you can speak to this as well, is that the local elections at the municipal level, well, city elections and village elections are partisan, whereas I think in a great many states, the local elections, city and village, are nonpartisan or multi-member districts if you're small enough. So if you could say something about those things. Thanks.
I want to be perfectly clear. I've never, ever, ever in my entire life run with the DFL endorsement or as a DFLer. All of those races were Green Party. And I won as a Green against an endorsed Democrat. So yeah. And they're actually considered nonpartisan the way they treat them in law in terms of the primary and all of that. Although there's no more primaries in Minneapolis because the Green on the council led the effort to get instant runoff voting, which then started in Minneapolis, but caught on to St. Paul, Bloomington, and somewhere else. That's the other thing to think of when you run locally is you can be a pilot and you can be a model. And if you have a good thing, it'll get copied and replicated. And eventually we're going to get it at the state government, I tell you. I think I had answered both your questions, but we could, in Minneapolis, city council members can put up to 3 words, like Democratic, Farmer, Labor, on the ballot. So you can identify your party, even though it's not technically legally a partisan election. And I just put down 2 words every time. Green Party. Question.
Yeah, I'm Eli Beckerman from the Green Rainbow Party of Massachusetts. It was a merger.
That would fit.
The Rainbow Coalition Party came out of some really amazing municipal level organizing, and we lost 2 lions in Boston who are using municipal elections to make a huge difference. But speaking of local people making huge differences, I really loved how Annie Young's story in Minneapolis got resurfaced in 2024 as a mentor of Jill's and then a really important part of Butch Ware's growing up. And wonder if you can speak, I think it's clear from the way you speak that you saw yourself as a public servant. And that's how Butch talks about what he learned from Annie. But if you could speak to her legacy. And then I also just want to bring up the direct action Minnesota activists who are facing real draconian charges from the federal government and for standing up to ICE. And I feel like there's so many different ways that the federal stuff is impacting local organizing, and everyone's on the target list. Plenty of people here for this meeting are on the target list, and they're coming after us. They're coming after countries, people, everything. And if you could speak to that.
I certainly did see myself as a public servant, and I think Annie did too. I was really delighted when we actually were able to steal Annie from the DFL, and it was partly their fault because they didn't get around to endorsing her. Now, at the first when we started, we could co-endorse with DFL, and so we did. Some of our first endorsements were a DFLer who was there, and Annie, I think, was one of that, and then she quit and joined the Greens and became very dedicated and loyal and solid on that. Also, when we did our instant runoff voting, we had some at-large park board members, and we used single transferable votes for them. And I know there was a workshop on proportional representation, but that's actually a proportional system. So you only need a minority percentage of first choices, or whatever you want to call it, to get elected for those seats. So we snuck it in, and I don't think we would have snuck it in if the Greens hadn't been there at the table writing the law. But Annie was amazing. And is a great role model. One thing I think that she would agree with is when you get elected, you got elected by a certain portion of your ward or your district. But once you're there, your job is to represent every single person and serve every single person in that district, whether or not they voted for you. And I think that's the way that she felt. And she served at large citywide, but I also felt like once I got elected, the hiring committee had spoken, but now I actually worked for the whole city because the whole city was paying me, and I should answer to the whole city and think of that. So I forget the rest of your questions, but I think that with the activists, that's probably a way you could try to support and see if there's a legal fund for them. And some of them are really outspoken and powerful about that and defending their rights. We also have an amazing lawyers guild and other lawyers who are trying to give legal aid and support, and a Hennepin County attorney who's willing to challenge the feds in this, which is really important. She decided not to run again, and I think she partly did that so she had full liberty to go all out, but we're struggling there. Yes, sir.
Scanning in frame.
We have Nikhil Ananda on stack.
Say again. Okay. So my name Dan Platt from New York. As someone who runs for local office and is weighing how to actually govern, how would you respond to the different kind of mindset compared to yours of Councilperson Savant and her kind of go hard, adversarial, go for the maximum kind of position with people power behind you and get the goods, even if you only serve one term?
I think one thing you've got to do is figure out who you are and where you're at. So just because I said I did stuff and it worked for me, take it with a grain of salt. I think what's probably the most important is that you maintain your personal integrity. So we've all got personalities and we've all got styles too, and you got to be true to yourself. Look at your weaknesses and look at your strengths and see how that is. I was accused many times of being kind of too weak, and why are you soft-spoken and compromising? Now, I made up for that sometimes by really pushing, trying to go big, trying to help do something that would be extreme, but I also did it by using, maybe that's too harsh a word, but by utilizing willing activists to come in and also be that voice. I mean, we did 15 Now, and we did a minimum wage in Minneapolis, the first city in the state to do it. And we followed Seattle's, we weren't the first in the country. But we did that also by having activism, and building those coalitions is so important. Sometimes it's an idea that comes from the outside and you just support it and cheerlead and you're there. But I also think you can use them. So there's different ways. I think you'll have to think about how important it is that you stay there or try to stay there and how you best represent people based on who you are as well.
We're going to go to Nick Yolanda in the chat for the next question.
Yeah, mahalo. Cam, great presentation. It was a little unclear to me. When you first ran in 2002, 2004, 2006, were you on the ballot? Were they partisan races and you ran as a Green Party candidate? And then they went to nonpartisan, as they are in a lot of places, including here. They used to be partisan. Now they're nonpartisan. And second, were there more than one Green on the Minneapolis City Council? And thank you and mahalo for your presentation.
Thanks for your kind words. They're legally considered nonpartisan. A lot of the local races are in Minnesota, but the political parties endorse candidates, campaign for them. And in Minneapolis, you can list your party for mayor and city council races on the ballot. So that's kind of confusing, I think, for folks. And it's perfectly fine for the parties to endorse candidates in those so-called nonpartisan races. One of the things that are nice about them also is there's not a partisan primary, so that all candidates appear on the ballot. There were other Greens on the council before I got elected. There was Dean Zimmerman and Natalie Johnson Lee, but they both lost the same year that I won. So my full 16 years, I was the only Green on the council. And I did it. You had some of the years a little bit off. The elections were every 4 years starting in 2001, but of course I didn't start serving until January of 2002. So maybe your years were right based on that. I don't know.
No, you're right. I thought it was every 2 years.
Okay, thanks.
We have another person on stack. Freeman.
Oh, what? Oh. Minnesota. Okay.
Please,
You
can you guys hear
betcha.
me?
No, so I had to say something. So for many, many years, I was busy in the Twin Cities, taking over hundreds and hundreds of properties, moving homeless families into there, and didn't. Anyway, so when we would do housing takeovers, that kind of stuff, we learned about the Minneapolis police. And, you know, they would hold guns to our heads, watch homeless people piss themselves. My family grew up at 38th in Chicago, where George Floyd was killed. And so as I was developing politically, I said, oh my God, I want to live. I have to leave the Twin Cities and go to Philadelphia and be invisible. That part didn't work. But anyway, one of the things that has impressed me over the years is even though you're very soft-spoken, gentle, you are definitely a warrior. It's a very dangerous place to be doing the organizing. And that's something that I very much salute you for, because not only the genocide, not only the killing of George Floyd and the history of, you know, just the attacks on homeless people in that state. We also have the history of the bread riots and the birth of the Red Squad. And to know that you have weathered the storm, I think just deserves a standing ovation. And that isn't something that's quiet. That's something that's quiet. And the woman that asked earlier what she could do, you can support the candidates that are running. I have a sister right now that's, you know, her whole family's sick because of the water situation. And I think that water is definitely a major issue. And all I wanted to do is salute you.
Okay. Thank you.
We're going to go to Freeman in the chat, and then we have two more in the room, and then we're going to close out questions.
Yo, peace. Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me? Okay, I guess couldn't see myself. This is Kimon Freeman. I'm in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., and I really appreciate this panel and this discussion. I think it's timely. I mean, who would have thought that the revolution would have started in Minneapolis other than Prince? But I think it's time that we extend that revolution to the nation's capital. I had a meeting with David Hodge. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, the young survivor from what was it? Whatever so many mass shootings. I can't think which one it was. And he was a former part of the leadership of the DNC. He had to step down because he had the audacity to primary ineffective or aging members of the Democratic Party, and he was pushed out. And when I met with him, I thought that, you got pushed out of DNC. Maybe you will be interested in supporting independent candidates, third-party candidates, Green Party candidates. And he said to me that no one is investing in DC because we don't have a vote. And I'm like, wow. So if the establishment is not investing in DC, but we have the platform of being the nation's capital, why don't the Green Party pay attention, more attention, and target the nation's capital to amplify and promote the third party? Because one of the other panels I attended said that when you read back the Green Party's platform, most people are green. And they hold a nose in Democratic primaries or whatever because they want to participate, blah, 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 but they're not truly. And now with the fact that the Democratic Party is falling apart and imploding, I think it's time for us to assert ourselves. But wouldn't it be, not just for my campaign, even though I have my own issues where I don't think the Green Party national leadership has supported campaigns in DC enough, but I just think that since every congressperson, I mean, this is the seat of government, everyone is here. Why don't we increase Green Party's presence in the nation's capital of 700,000 people, and it will have a ripple effect around the entire country? I'd love to hear you guys' responses for that.
I think absolutely we should try to amplify what's going on in DC. In fact, the whole reason I'm up here is try to encourage folks like you to run for office and build locally where they live. And that's how we're going to, I think, make a huge difference. I don't know how much support has come your way from outside of Washington, D.C. I will say that I think I was realistic when I ran locally. I wasn't necessarily expecting a ton of support from the national party for a city council race. I got good support from my state party. Yeah, I think the whole point, I think, is to get more people elected at the local level can really make a difference.
There is a Green Party DC. Yeah,
Oh, DC statehood, its time is overdue. Yeah, it's on the platform. Yeah, totally. Oh, excellent. Can I just say this one thing about being in office too? All the cities, especially the big ones, so maybe, or the middle-sized, whatever Minneapolis is, and bigger, have legislative agendas, and most of the larger ones have paid lobbyists. So that's a way you could impact things too, is make sure to get that big thing you can't do at the city level on the legislative agenda to get done at the state where it should, or at the federal. And that can make a difference. It's small. It's a seed to plant. Yes.
I just have to say, we got to do better. This man has been raising his hand for like an hour. So I know, like, you just like.
Now we're closing on. Here's the last.
Here's the microphone.
My name is Adam Guyman, and I'm from the state of Utah, the Green Party of Utah. And I noticed earlier you mentioned about I know I rolled for office in 2018, and basically I do know that it's really important when you do have support. And I know I didn't get a lot of votes. I rolled for office at the time for Salt Lake County Council at Large Seat 3 as a write-in, because I didn't have the ability of getting in early enough, I guess, to actually get my party to be able to support me, I guess. And so I was going to say the other thing too is I was a member of an organization called UAPB, Utah Against Police Brutality, and right around the same time when George Floyd was killed, we were protesting as well in Salt Lake City, and I mean, we actually tried to create a board. It was basically a police. It was a board to try to have. I can't think of the name right off, but there's a certain acronym. Yeah, that's what it was. Civilian Review Board. It basically were people who were not police officers or people that had either a police officer in their family couldn't be on the board, but we were trying to do that. But unfortunately, in Utah, they actually made it illegal on a state level to even do that. And I kind of wanted to find out what your thoughts, since you were saying you were mayor and you've been in that position, how your thoughts were about that, I guess.
Civilian oversight of the police department, I think, is a big challenge, and state law is often involved in creating that challenge. They actually have a licensing board in Minnesota and probably everywhere else where they get license from the state. So we actually, I was part of amending our Civilian Review Authority ordinance early on, and then it got amended later, and it got amended later. And now there's a Police Conduct Oversight Commission, they call it. I got convinced that that was like shuffling around a deck of cards, like playing Chinese checkers over here when it had no actual influence over the police culture or the laws governing the police. There were different tools for that. There's a contract, which I'm now pretty sure is hopeless because of binding arbitration. They always refer to the past contracts. So police are overpaid. Police don't have enough oversight. And what we need to do is, I think, take away more authority from the police. I was a person who actually wanted to dissolve the Minneapolis Police Department, and that would have been their federation, which is a union, but it's the union just of people who work for the Minneapolis Police Department and are licensed officers. So I'm an anti-union about that union, but I'm not anti-union. Don't get me wrong. But I don't know. It's also an insidious problem about the state being able to overrule anything a city does. So that has happened a lot. And even if you do something as little and minor as banning the use of single-use carry-out plastic bags, which I worked so hard to get a unanimous vote on my city council to get that done, and then the same lobbyists who lost to us went to the state and preempted it and said, you can't do that anymore. And gun control is the same way in Minnesota. And so I don't want to go off on too many tangents from that. But also, I wanted to answer, or you made me think of this other thing that the state gets in the way of, which is this concept of having universally accessible housing. So the city has a building code. We can muddle around with our building code, but it can't require anything bigger than the state code. And I had an idea that we should at least require some universally accessible conditions on every single house. It wouldn't be that hard if when they were building the new thing, they had doors wide enough, bathrooms big enough, and ramps put in, some kind of sidewalk at one door. It really wouldn't have been that big of a thing if it's required to do in a new building, and it wouldn't add all those costs, but we couldn't get it done because the state doesn't want to do it either. But that's wasn't what you asked about, but you asked about it earlier from somebody, and I want to promote that whole concept.
Great. Thank you, Cam.
Can I make one last pitch at the end? And I know that I've gone over. I am worried about the way we actually do government in there. I think that the Greens shouldn't only be concerned about elections and about policies and about how they individually govern really great and ethically and open and all of that. But we need to somehow change the system. Our judicial legal system is obsolete and archaic. We have people sitting in robes up in big thrones, banging with hammers. There's a vision there of a restorative justice circle that's very different. We should have a replacement vision too for the way we run our city government. It's Robert's Rules of Order, point of information. Is there a second? All this obscure mumbo jumbo where you're not a person anymore. We should figure out how to create humane government. And looking at what England and Canada get to have, they don't even have to be stuck with a president. Overruled. But anyway, think about how obsolete and archaic it is that we're doing our government and inhumane, and how can we make it more real and more like a people thing. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Brilliant, Cam. Mahalo.
Thank you.
Where's the stop share? Hey, how do you stop sharing on here? I can't stop sharing. Yeah, but I can't stop sharing.
My phone was up here. Where'd it go?